teach everything He commanded them to teach.
New ways to communicate God's Word.
Present positive images to our people.
This message of truth and salvation.
Culture of encounter.
Gospel of Christ worldwide.
Shalom World TV.
Faith-filled,
Dynamic,
virtue-building,
Commercial-free,
family-friendly,
Catholic charismatic channel to the whole world.
Promote the gift of church teaching.
Dedicated for the new evangelization.
Mentor the young into a deeper embrace of the Catholic faith.
wonderful contributions to the church.
people of prayer.
Attractive people, attractive messages.
Peace of Christ.
Promote the values of life.
This is media at its very best.
The voice of the church.
With great love.
Taking this to the next step.
Shalom World TV.
Shalom, shalom.
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 Shalom World, God's own channel.
Let's see, if I make it across North Carolina, go up to 70, that should... Oh, hi, how are you guys doing? I'm Deacon Ralph Poyo, and I am a full-time evangelist working with New Evangelization Ministries. I have this opportunity to come and be with you for a small journey. I'm sorry, I was just working on my plans. I'm trying to do a family vacation and we're trying to figure out this trip. And I don't know about you, but sometimes you really got to figure this out because it costs so much money these days. You got to figure out how much it all costs. I mean, there's transportation, there's housing, and then you got to figure out the chart and then the directions, and you don't want to get lost. It just gets very confusing. In fact, maps and blueprints, and we're making plans for all kinds of different things, all kinds of things. I mean, think about this. We've got kids, we want them to go to college. What's the plan? How are we going to get them to college? We got to figure out how much it's going to cost. We have to estimate. We've got to plan for our kids. What schools do we want them to go to? If we want to build an addition to our house or build a whole new house, obviously we've got to get somebody to come and create some sort of plan for us, some sort of idea that helps us figure out what exactly we want to do and what we want to accomplish. And once we get that plan, then we got to figure out how much is it going to cost. See, if we don't make a plan, then the likelihood of our success is not going to work. Well, I'm here teaming up with Shalom Ministries, and we want to walk with you on a journey. We want you to join us for this process of figuring out what does it really take to get to heaven. Like, for example, do you know what is the plan to get to heaven? Do you know what is the plan that God has established for you and I, that we might be able to join Him in heaven? I do a lot of preaching and missions all around the country. I've been doing it for about 7 years. And in my missions, oftentimes, I'll ask people, how many of you want to go to heaven? And you know, just about every single person raises their hand. I want to go. I want to be in heaven. But then I ask the next question, well, what's your plan? How are you going to get there? See, I don't know if you're anything like me. I was a cradle Catholic. I grew up in a Colombian household. My father's Cuban, my mother's Colombian, and we were your traditional Catholics. We would go to church every week. We would spend all this wonderful time just going to Mass and doing this family Catholic thing. But, you know, I kind of really, be honest with you, I did my religion, my religious education, mostly because my parents told me I had to. Maybe, again, you're like me in that we go through this process of going through the motions, and, you know, as I was growing up, I became involved in soccer, and then soccer became so important to me. It's almost as if I was just kind of going through life, finding things that I liked to do, and then I would just kind of pursue those things. Again, not with any clear purpose or plan in my life. Well, so I went through my religious education. And again, the only reason I did it was because my mother told me I had to. Mom, why do I have to go? I'd go to these classes. They were so boring. It's like, why? There's nothing in it for me. It was just so boring. And I'd sit in these classes, and the teachers, God bless them, they would do their best. But to be honest with you, because I really wasn't interested in the subject matter and the topic, I didn't really give them the time of day. So as I went through the process, as of course, if you're like me, you're cradle Catholic, you got baptized. I don't remember my baptism. Then I got older, it was time for First Communion. And I remember during that time, it was kind of exciting for me, but again, I didn't really understand the Eucharist. I just kind of did it because, my parents said, you finally get to go receive communion. You know what that's like, right? First you're at a place where I can't receive, I'm not old enough, and now all of a sudden I can receive, and I couldn't wait. That was so exciting. And then I moved on. I moved on to confirmation. But really, at that point, I'd grown so accustomed to playing soccer and pursuing and hanging out with friends that I really, really just kind of got from my confirmation just to get it out of the way, to get my parents off my back. Well, it wasn't until I was a senior in high school that someone took the time and the energy and effort to introduce me to the person of Jesus Christ. I had learned that he was God. He was God who became man, but I always kind of thought he was somebody who was out there. I mean, I had never seen him. I never knew what he was like, and I certainly didn't know that you could have a relationship with him now. But he introduced me to Christ. He showed me how to have a relationship with him, and for me, that was the changing. That was the change for me in my life and what needed to happen. At that point, I began to realize that my faith, the Catholic faith, was more than just going into hoop jumping through hoops. Like, okay, if you want to go to heaven, you got to do these 5 things, and then that'll get you there. Well, it was more than that. It was about having a relationship with the living God, with the source of all life and all love. I never knew you could have that kind of relationship. To be honest, I thought, you got to live this life, do the best you can, and then when you die, you get to be with God. And of course, most people's plan of salvation would probably be kind of like this. You got to get your entrance sacraments, right? You got to get your confirmation, your First Communion, and your baptism. Get all those done. Then you got to go to Mass every week. And then you got to go out there and you got to be as good as you can possibly be. And we hope at the end of our days that maybe then, we get to be with God. But otherwise, we got to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and just get out there and be good. Well, that's not the plan. In fact, there's some false teachings going on today where most people are thinking, well, it really doesn't matter what you do or what religion you have, because God is all love. And, in the end, he's going to just get us all into heaven anyway. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the plan is. We can just go live our lives and do anything we want to do. But that's not true. That's a lie. That's something that Satan has cooked up for us to bite into. And you know what? There's so many of us that are eating that lie that we're just kind of wandering off and wandering away from God, thinking, it doesn't matter. I can go play, I can go sin, I can go do whatever I want to do. It doesn't matter if I hurt people. It doesn't matter if I'm selfish and self-centered. It doesn't matter about doing any of that stuff. What really matters is that I get to live my life the way I want to, and then in the end I get to be with God. Well, I'm sorry. But that shows a great ignorance in our understanding of who God is. And because we don't understand who God is, we don't really understand who we are. We just don't get it. We don't realize what it's all about. So imagine, for me, taking my map out and trying to chart out a course of where I want to go. Say I want to go to the Grand Tetons, but I don't know, I don't have a map and I don't know how to get there. But I'll just say, if I just get in my car and I just drive across the country in that direction, then all of a sudden, that's going to get me to the Grand Tetons. I'm sorry, but it just doesn't work that way. So what I really want you to do is I want you to take some time and evaluate for yourself as what is it that you believe is the plan to get us to heaven? Do you know the plan? What's it going to take for us to enter into the beatific vision, to see God face to face? Do we understand what that looks like? Do we understand the process of what it's going to take to get there? Because you see, if we don't understand any of that, it's going to obviously affect our desire to do it. I know so many people that have no desire to follow God. They have no desire to be a part of Him. They have no desire to engage in a relationship with Him because of the little bit they understand of what they think God is all about. Let me give you one last thought. I was having lunch with a kid when I was a high school youth minister, and we're talking about God, and one of his friends came up to me and said, "Are you guys talking about God? I don't believe in God. I want to have anything to do with it. It's a waste of time. All He does is give you all these rules, and then there's no fun in life." And I asked him this one question. I says, "Well, tell me who you believe God to be. Explain that to me. I'd like to know, what is your understanding of who God really is? Because you know what? The truth is, I probably won't believe in Him either. So tell me, who is your God?" You see, if we don't really understand who God is, then we're certainly going to have no desire to figure out what the plan is. And then we're certainly going to have no desire to understand what is the plan to get there. So I hope that you can make a quick evaluation for yourself and figure out, do you really know what is the plan to get to heaven? And I hope that you'll join me on this journey, because that's exactly what we're going to do. I remember when I was younger, I was a youth minister for 27 years. And during this one particular stint of my career, I was in charge of a youth group and confirmation program. Kids hated to come to confirmation program. They hated it because it was something that was mandatory. They didn't feel like they wanted to do. Gosh, I could relate to that so easily because that's exactly how I felt. So I wanted to make something a little bit interesting and different for them. So instead of making required classes, I invited them to come to the youth ministry nights that we would have, and then I would provide a workshop for them so that I could focus in actually on the sacrament of confirmation, which was one of the requirements for the program. They had to understand what was going on. And one of the things that I did is I got them all together, and if you can imagine being in a room, and I had a big dry erase board up there, and I came to them and I asked them this very simple question. I said, "How many of you guys want to go to heaven?" And of course, everybody raises their hand. And everybody does. I'm like, well, terrific. Well, if that's what you want to do, if you guys want to go to heaven, then it begs one simple question, and that is this: how are you going to get there? And it's funny because they're sitting there going, "What?" And I asked, "Well, how are you going to get to heaven?" "What do you mean?" they asked. "How are you going to get to heaven? You all said you wanted to go." Well, it's kind of like, how are you going to get to a restaurant? We all say, "How many people want to go? I want to go." And everybody raises their hands, and you all know how to get there, and you know how you're going to get there. But same thing with heaven is, how many want to go to heaven, and how are you going to get there? Surely you know how to get to heaven. And they all kept looking at me like, deer in headlights. Like, what is this guy? And they're looking at each other like, what is he talking about? What is going on? And I kept pushing them a little bit. I'm like, come on, dude. Do you know how to get to heaven? How are you going to get to heaven? And they're like, what do we need to do to get this guy to shut up? Because he keeps asking us these questions, and we don't know we don't know what the answer is. And so finally, one kid figures, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I need to do in school. So they raise their hand up, and all of a sudden they go, oh. One kid goes, and I'm like, yes, what? He goes, "I'm going to go to church." Oh, awesome. So I grab my dry erase marker and I write church up on my dry erase board. Like, awesome. Okay, so another kid begins to figure out, oh, what does this look like? Oh, I know. What? Oh, I'm going to pray. Oh, prayer. Now that's good. So I wrote down prayer. And then another kid caught on. And he's, I'm going to go to confession at least once a year, whether I need it or not. And at that point, I'm like, yeah, confession, terrific. We got that all nailed out. And then finally we get to this one kid who's kind of sitting there thinking, he's pensive, he's kind of wondering, what does this look like? And he's thinking, well, gosh, I want to give an answer like everybody else did. What does that look like? And finally he's thinking, and then finally he raises his hand and he gives the answer that I hear everywhere. Like most people around the country, most people who go to Mass, that are in churches, and if they were going to take all their homilies and all their catechesis that they've received and they were going to combine it into one word, into one answer to define what is the plan to get to heaven, I think this kid, he nailed it on the head. Most people across the country would say it's true. he raised his hand and he said, oh. I'm like, yes. He goes, I'm gonna be good. Because let's face it, it's kind of hard to be good, isn't it? I mean, really, we know, like, we go to church and we try to be good, but even by the time we leave Mass, we get out into the parking lot, we could sin before we're even out of the parking lot based on whether somebody cuts us off, right? And then we want to send them off with a blessing, like, God bless you. You know what I'm talking about. It's just so easy to sin. It's so easy. I mean, we could go home and turn on the TV and grab that remote control and just flip through the channels, and there's so much sin that's being played on television now. I mean, it's almost impossible not to hit a channel where there's not sin. And if we sit there and eat it up, then what are we doing? We're sinning. I mean, Jesus says, be holy, for my Father in heaven is holy. It's just so hard. It's so hard to be holy. So this kid, he kind of nailed it. Most people say, yeah, that's it. It's it. We got to be good. I mean, we know the basics. We know the hoops we got to jump through, right? We got to get our entrance sacraments. We got to get our baptism. We got to get our first communion. We got to get our confirmation. And then, of course, we know we're supposed to go to Mass every week, right? Because we know it's a mortal sin if you don't go to Mass every week unless you have a good and valid reason. And by the way, a sports tournament is not a good and valid reason. So we got to get our sacraments, we got to go to church, and then we're going to go out there and we're going to do the very best we can. And we hope against hope, that it's good enough to get us in, right? I mean, doesn't that sound like that's the plan? Come on, how many of you guys think that's it, really? That's kind of what we've all been trying to do, is try to be good. And we're thinking, yes, because God is so loving and He's so great, He's just going to help us to come back in. But the truth is, that's not the plan. That's not the plan. That's not the plan of salvation. That's not what God has set up for us to get to heaven. In fact, St. Paul is very clear, and we're going to unpack this later on, but he's very clear. The moment you try to make this your plan, you have already committed yourself to hell, because that's not the plan of salvation. So we're going to spend more time in the future unpacking this idea of, well, what is the actual plan of God? What does it look like? And before we can understand the plan, we really have to go back and understand some very basic concepts. Chief of which is people don't really get their heads around this idea of, well, what is heaven and hell and all the rest of that. We're going to, like I said, we're going to get to that shortly. But for right now, I really want you to begin to think for yourselves and examine, well, what are the things, again, that I believe or what is required of me to get to heaven? And am I really doing those things? So I hope that as we move forward, as we begin to zero in on understanding and charting out our plan, just like we did with the maps and our blueprints and all the rest of that, that you can have a self-examination and ask yourself the question, am I really following the plan of God, or am I not? Welcome back. Well, I have this problem, and the problem is that when I encounter people who are trying to learn more about their relationship with Christ, I find that a lot of times they have a lot of misconceptions, and we need to deal with one particular misconception, and that is, what is heaven and hell? Again, if you're like me growing up, one of your thoughts would be, well, obviously, hello, it's a no-brainer. I mean, heaven is a place you go when you die, and hell is the place you don't want to go when you die. Well, that is true. There is a place, a heaven and a hell. Heaven, oftentimes, is not just a space, like a place where you go to. It's a state of relationship. So let me kind of simplify things down so that people can kind of get their heads around this, because for me, this was something that seemed like it'd be a very simple principle, but oftentimes you don't realize that it is. So let's put it this way. Heaven is to live in eternity with God, and hell is to live in eternity separated from God. Now that we have that understanding, it's for eternity in a relationship with the living God. And a relationship means an intimate relationship, not just this idea of, well, I met my butcher and we kind of have this relationship. He's my butcher and that's it. Now, relationship with the living God means an intimate relationship, a kind of relationship, for example, that we have modeled in the sacrament of marriage. Marriage is one of the best sacraments for modeling the kind of relationship that Jesus desires to have with us. He wants to be in this intimate relationship, so much so that he invites us to be his bride. In the scriptures, in Revelation, the church is defined as the bride of Christ, of which he is the groom. So we need to understand that this is a relationship with the living God for all eternity. If heaven is to live in eternity with God, and hell is to live in eternity without God, then when does eternity begin for you? I remember, again, working with those students, asking them that question. When does eternity begin for you? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And people, they start, right now, eternity's now. Well, yes, but no, it didn't begin now for you. So another one goes back, well, gosh, obviously it's a no-brainer. At baptism, surely that would be when eternity began for me, because that's when I get to live with God. No, it wasn't that either. And another one goes, well, then of course, when you're born, because the moment that you're born, you begin to exist. I'm like, well, that's really not true either. Eternity for you and me begins the moment we are conceived. You see, that's why Catholics are so firmly entrenched in the teaching and understanding that abortion is wrong. Why? Because the moment a person is conceived, that's when they begin to exist for the rest of eternity. So eternity for you and me begins the moment we're conceived. So that's the $1 million question, and that's the $1 million answer. Now, the $1 billion question and answer we've got to find is this. If eternity begins at the moment of conception, then the next question is, when or where are you existing the moment you're conceived? Are you existing in relationship with God? Or are you existing separated from God? And it's funny because as I ask audiences this, they're kind of like feeling kind of awkward. They don't know what to say. Most people, how they are afraid to raise their hand and answer questions like this. So I do it this way. How many people think that the moment that you're conceived with God? And I probably get maybe about, let's say it's 100 people in a room. I probably get maybe 30, 35, 40 people that raise their hand and say, oh yeah, the moment we're conceived with God. And then I ask, how many of you think that you're conceived separated from God? And there maybe get about 15, 20 people that raise their hand. And then the majority of the people, they don't raise their hands. They're just, I'm like, okay, well, how many people don't know? Oh, then they can raise their hand. Okay. Well, the truth is that if we were to go back to our religious education, the things that maybe we did learn in our classes, we know that we were born with original sin. And we were born lacking sanctifying grace. The grace that enables you to be and live right. We're lacking that grace. And because we're lacking that grace and we're born with original sin, now that's the moment we're born, back that up to conception. The truth is that the moment you were conceived separated from God. Now think about that. If you were conceived separated from God, then the moment you're conceived, where are you technically existing? That's a pretty critical question. The moment that you were conceived, if you're conceived separated from God, technically you are already existing in hell. You're already existing in hell. You see, Jesus is defined in the scriptures as the Savior of the world. But when's the last time you were looking for a Savior? When's the last time you had it in your mind like, man, I know I need to be saved, because Satan has done such a tremendously good job of keeping us focused in on everything in the world, like all the bling of life, right? We're focused on our homes and a big screen television and all the gadgets and things that we can have and what kind of car we're driving, what kind of food we get to eat, how many restaurants we go to. All our lives are now so focused on our earthly existence that we've forgotten there's an entirely other component to us. See, we're not just physical bodies. We're both physical and spiritual. And because we're physical and spiritual, there's a whole part of us that is starving to death. You see, with original sin with original sin, everyone born after Adam and Eve were born separated from God. They don't know what that is to exist with God. The only thing we know is how to live apart from God. And so he has established the church to help us learn what is the plan of salvation so that we can be reunited. But there's something that every single one of us has in common, and that is this. is that in our hearts, in our heart of hearts when no one's looking, each of us desperately desires to be loved. We long to be loved. We long to be loved just for who we are. Not because we have to do something for somebody or we got to be something for somebody, but simply because we have been created for this amazing love. And we're never going to be happy until we experience this love. Never. So, we need to understand that we're living outside the life of God, and we desperately need to re-enter that life. And in fact, we have only one lifetime to re-enter God's life. And as you're going to come to find out as we unpack this plan of God, that the choice is yours. The choice is yours. Do you want to live in eternity with God, or do you want to live separated? So that's something for you to ponder until we come back again next time. As we get ready to go, just ask God to help you begin to understand and see the truth about a relationship with Him. I look forward to seeing you again in Common Sense Catholic. Bye now.